The command center fell silent as radar operators stared at their screens. Column after column of armored vehicles vanished from existence. No warning, no escape. Something was tracking them through weather that should have made detection impossible. What you just saw was one file. The Cold War was fought in secrets like this. Cold War black files is where those stories resurface. Subscribe. New files declassified. For decades, military doctrine had been built on a simple premise. Mass concentrations of armor could overwhelm any defense if they moved fast enough under cover of darkness or adverse conditions. Entire war plans depended on it. Thousands of tanks would pour through gaps in enemy lines before anyone could respond. That assumption died in the span of 72 hours. The story begins years earlier, as in the corridors of defense laboratories, where engineers grappled with an impossible problem. How do you watch an entire battlefield at once? How do you track thousands of moving vehicles across hundreds of miles of terrain, regardless of weather or time of day? Traditional reconnaissance had severe limitations. Satellites passed overhead on predictable schedules. Reconnaissance aircraft had to fly low and slow, making them vulnerable. Cameras needed clear skies and daylight. Radar systems of the era could detect aircraft, but struggled to distinguish ground vehicles from the clutter of terrain, buildings, and vegetation. The solution required rethinking radar technology from its foundations. Instead of looking for objects in the sky, engineers designed a system that would stare at the ground continuously. Eye processing returned sophisticated enough to separate a moving truck from a swaying tree. The computational power required was staggering for the time. The aircraft responsible looked unremarkable from the outside. A modified commercial airframe with a peculiar canoe-shaped radome bolted to its underside. But inside that radome sat technology that fundamentally altered the mathematics of ground warfare. The radar array stretched 24 feet long. It transmitted pulses while the aircraft flew in oval patterns, allowing computers to synthesize returns into detailed images. The system could distinguish between a tank and a jeep from 90,000 feet up. Operators sat at workstations inside the fuselage, watching as roads, convoys, and staging areas appeared on their displays with remarkable clarity. But previous reconnaissance required pilots to see their targets or fly low enough for cameras to capture useful images. Weather meant delays. Darkness meant waiting. Smoke screens actually worked. Commanders could hide armor formations in forests or use terrain to mask their movements. The new system ignored all of that. It bounced radio waves off the ground and measured the returns with such precision that analysts could identify individual vehicle types from 15 miles up. Moving or stationary. Day or night. Through clouds, smoke, or sandstorms. But having the technology was one thing. Proving it could change the outcome of battles was another. During its first operational deployment, the aircraft monitored a battlefield larger than some European countries. Operators inside tracked over 600 vehicles simultaneously. The convoys that moved under darkness, believing themselves invisible, appeared as bright icons on screens hundreds of miles away. One particular evening demonstrated the system's devastating effectiveness. An armored column began repositioning through what should have been perfect concealment. No moon, heavy cloud cover, terrain that blocked line of sight from ground observers. By all traditional measures, the movement should have gone undetected. Instead, operators noted the column's departure within minutes. They tracked its route in real time, updating its position every few seconds. Attack aircraft received coordinates while the column was still miles from its objective. When armored columns attempted to reposition under cover of darkness, their movements appeared on screens in real time. An attack aircraft received coordinates within minutes. The columns never reached their objectives. Commanders on the receiving end faced a psychological shift as profound as the tactical one. Every movement was observed. Every concentration of forces became a target. The fog of war, which had protected armies throughout history, had been stripped away on one side while remaining intact for the other. Military analysts reviewing the data realized something profound. The defensive strategies that had governed land warfare since tanks first appeared were now reversed. The attacker, traditionally holding the advantage of choosing when and where to strike, had become visible, vulnerable. Every road became a kill zone if someone was watching from above. Inside the aircraft, crews worked 12-hour shifts monitoring sectors of terrain. They developed techniques for distinguishing between civilian and military traffic, for identifying command vehicles within convoys, for predicting where formations would move based on early indicators. The workstations displayed not just current positions, but track histories, allowing operators to see patterns in enemy movements. Communication systems linked the aircraft directly to ground commanders and strike aircraft. Information that once took hours to relay through multiple channels now flowed in minutes. A ground unit calling for fire support could have target coordinates derived from overhead surveillance almost immediately. The system proved equally valuable for preventing friendly fire incidents. By tracking the positions of friendly forces with the same precision as enemy units, operators could warn when units were approaching each other or when planned strikes risked hitting the wrong targets. War colleges had taught generations of officers that concentrated armor formations were the decisive weapon of modern combat. That doctrine assumed those formations could achieve tactical surprise. But surprise requires the ability to hide, and nothing stayed hidden anymore. The implications spread beyond any single conflict. Nations that had invested billions in tank armies faced an uncomfortable question. What value does a massive armored force hold when an enemy can track every vehicle and direct precision strikes before they ever engage? Defense ministries around the world began studying the operational reports. Some saw their entire strategic posture undermined. Plans that called for rapid armored thrusts across borders assumed those movements could be massed in secret and executed before defenders could respond. Those plans went back to the drawing board. Others rushed to develop countermeasures. Electronic warfare systems that might jam or deceive the radar. Tactics that dispersed formations to make them harder to target, even if detected. Investments in their own surveillance capabilities to level the playing field. Some military powers began rethinking decades of strategic planning. Others rushed to develop countermeasures or acquire similar capabilities. The aircraft itself became one of the most sought-after force multipliers in existence. The technology continued evolving. Newer versions incorporated more powerful processors, better discrimination between vehicle types, and integration with other intelligence sources. The aircraft could now correlate radar tracks with signals intelligence, communications intercepts, and other data streams to build comprehensive pictures of enemy operations. Operators could identify not just where vehicles were, but which units they belonged to based on movement patterns and formations. They could watch supply lines to assess an enemy's logistical state. They could detect preparations for offensive operations days before they launched by observing the telltale signs of forces concentrating and repositioning. But the real revolution wasn't the technology itself. It was the knowledge that such technology existed and could be deployed anywhere. Commanders planning operations now had to assume someone might be watching. That assumption changed everything about how ground forces could operate. Units that once moved in large formations began dispersing. Supply convoys that once traveled main highways shifted to smaller roads or moved in smaller groups. Armies invested heavily in deception, creating dummy formations to draw attention away from real movements. Yet even these adaptations had limits. Dispersed forces are harder to command and slower to concentrate when needed. Smaller convoys are less efficient. Deception requires resources and expertise. The fundamental calculus of ground warfare had shifted, and no amount of adaptation could fully restore the advantages that secrecy once provided. The aircraft continued flying missions decades after its introduction, its capabilities still relevant, even as technology advanced. Each deployment added to the institutional knowledge of how to exploit persistent surveillance. Tactics refined over hundreds of missions became doctrine. The era when armies could maneuver unseen had ended. And it ended not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of radar pulses bouncing off metal, moving through the darkness. Future historians would mark it as one of those technological inflection points that quietly reshapes warfare. Not as dramatic as nuclear weapons or as visible as stealth aircraft, but perhaps more fundamental in changing how battles are fought. Because it didn't just add a new weapon to the battlefield. It removed the battlefield's oldest protection, the ability to hide.